In the monsoon-drenched jungles of southern Thailand, where the Malay Peninsula narrows to a thin strip of land between the Andaman Sea and the Gulf of Thailand, local fishermen and rubber tappers occasionally stumble upon something that shouldn't be there. A brick foundation emerging from the forest floor. A stone inscription covered in script that no one can read. Golden jewelry buried in river sediment. Fragments of ceramics bearing designs from distant lands. These aren't random artifacts. They're clues to a vanished civilization. Whispers of a kingdom that once controlled these coasts. That traded with China and India. That sent embassies to imperial courts. That built cities and temples and accumulated wealth from maritime commerce. The old chronicles give this kingdom a name. Langkasuka. Chinese pilgrims mentioned it. Malay legends remember it. But where was it? What was it? And how does an entire kingdom disappear so completely that even its location becomes a matter of heated archaeological debate? Tonight we investigate one of Southeast Asia's most elusive mysteries, the Lost City of Langkasuka, a civilization that existed for at least 7 centuries, possibly much longer, yet has left so little trace that we're still arguing about where to dig. Let's begin with what we think we know, though even the supposedly solid facts about Langkasuka turn slippery under scrutiny. The kingdom first appears in Chinese records in the early 6th century CE. The Liang Dynasty Chronicle, compiled around 635 CE, describes a kingdom called Lang Yashu or Lang Jiashu. Scholars agree this is a Chinese transcription of Langkasuka, located on the Malay Peninsula, about 30 days' sail from the port of Guangzhou in southern China. The account describes a walled city built on a mountain, ruled by a king who lived in a 2-story palace. The people, according to these Chinese sources, were honest in their dealings, practiced both Buddhism and Hinduism, and had developed a sophisticated system of writing. They produced tin, fragrant woods, and other forest products valued in Chinese markets. They sent tributary missions to China bearing exotic gifts, elephants, rhinoceros horns, tortoiseshell, receiving in return the prestige of imperial recognition. This first mention establishes Langkasuka as a functioning kingdom by the 6th century, but it tells us frustratingly little about origins, internal structure, or precise location. The Chinese were good at recording what kingdoms sent as tribute, and roughly where they were located relative to Chinese ports, but terrible at providing the kind of geographic detail that would allow modern archaeologists to pinpoint sites. On the Malay Peninsula covers a lot of territory. The peninsula stretches over 1,000 kilometers from the Isthmus of Kra in the north to Singapore in the south. Somewhere along that coastline, on either the eastern or western shore or possibly inland, was the capital of Langkasuka. But where? The search for Langkasuka has consumed over a century of archaeological investigation and generated fierce debates among scholars. Multiple sites across southern Thailand and northern Malaysia have been proposed as potential locations for the lost capital. Yarang, near the modern city of Patani on the eastern coast of the peninsula, is a leading candidate. Extensive excavations there have uncovered substantial brick structures, elaborate water management systems, artifacts dating from the 6th to the 14th centuries, and a layout suggesting a significant urban center. The site fits with one interpretation of the Chinese geographic descriptions, and local tradition has long held that Yarang was an important ancient city. But other scholars argue for Kedah on the western coast of the peninsula, specifically the site of Sungai Mas in present-day Malaysia. Excavations there have revealed extensive ruins, including brick structures, religious monuments, and evidence of substantial maritime trade. The artifacts found at Sungai Mas show connections to India, China, and the Middle East, exactly what you'd expect from a major trading port. Proponents of the Kedah theory point out that the western coast was more directly connected to the Indian Ocean trade routes, which would explain Langkasuka's apparent wealth and importance. A third camp argues that Langkasuka wasn't a single fixed capital, but rather a mobile center of power that shifted locations over its long history, or perhaps a confederation of port cities that collectively constituted the kingdom. This theory suggests that looking for one lost city is fundamentally misunderstanding what Langkasuka actually was, not a territorial state with a permanent capital, but a more fluid maritime polity where power moved between different port settlements depending on changing trade patterns, succession disputes, or environmental factors. This debate about location isn't mere academic hair-splitting. Where Langkasuka was located tells us what kind of kingdom it was. If it was on the western coast, it was primarily oriented toward Indian Ocean trade, connected to the networks that linked India, Arabia, and East Africa. If it was on the eastern coast, it was more focused on the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea routes to China and Vietnam. If it moved between locations or was a confederation, it was a very different kind of political entity than the centralized kingdoms we're familiar with from other parts of Southeast Asia. What makes this mystery even more complex is that Langkasuka appears in sources from different periods and cultural contexts, and it's not always clear they're referring to the same place. The Chinese chronicles mention Langkasuka from the 6th through the 14th centuries, a span of 800 years. Malay sources, particularly the Hikayat Merong Mahawangsa and other traditional histories, tell stories of a kingdom called Langkasuka or Langkawi that seems both historical and legendary, mixing verifiable facts with mythological elements. Arab geographers of the medieval period mention a kingdom on the Malay Peninsula that might be Langkasuka, though the Arabic transcriptions are ambiguous. Thai chronicles briefly reference kingdoms in the deep south that could potentially be Langkasuka or its successors. Are all these sources talking about the same political entity, continuously existing for 8 centuries? Or is Langkasuka actually several different kingdoms that occupied roughly the same region at different times, and later sources conflated them into a single continuous narrative? This question is critical but nearly impossible to answer with current evidence. We need more archaeological data, more inscriptions, more datable artifacts that can establish clear chronological sequences. But the tropical climate of the Malay Peninsula, with its heavy rainfall and aggressive vegetation, is not kind to archaeological remains. Wooden structures rot within decades. Palm leaf manuscripts decay. Even brick and stone structures can be quickly overgrown and dismantled by tree roots. What survives is fragmentary, scattered, frustratingly incomplete. Let's examine what the different sources tell us about Langkasuka as a civilization, synthesizing the Chinese accounts, archaeological evidence, and later Malay traditions to construct a composite picture, while acknowledging the uncertainties. Langkasuka emerges as a coastal trading kingdom that flourished by controlling portions of the trans-peninsular trade routes. The Malay Peninsula occupies one of the most strategic locations in maritime Asia. Ships traveling between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea faced a choice: sail around the entire peninsula, adding weeks to the journey and risking the dangerous waters off the southern tip, or cross the peninsula via one of several trans-Isthmian routes. These overland portage routes were crucial to ancient and medieval trade. Ships would unload their cargoes on one coast. Porters and pack animals would carry the goods across the narrow neck of the peninsula, and different ships would carry them onward from the other coast. The kingdoms that controlled these portage routes could tax the trade, provide services, and accumulate substantial wealth without producing much themselves. Langkasuka appears to have been one of several kingdoms competing for control of these routes, rising to prominence when it successfully monopolized. Key portages and declining when rivals broke that monopoly or when maritime technology improved enough that ships could more safely sail around the peninsula. The archaeological evidence suggests that Langkasuka was genuinely cosmopolitan, a crossroads where Indian, Chinese, Arab, and indigenous Southeast Asian cultures intersected. Artifacts found at sites associated with Langkasuka include Indian stone sculptures and inscriptions, Chinese ceramics from multiple dynasties, Persian glass beads, local pottery showing blended artistic styles, gold and bronze jewelry incorporating design elements from across maritime Asia. This material culture indicates a society deeply embedded in long-distance trade networks, one where merchants and monks from distant lands were regular visitors, bringing goods and ideas that transformed local culture. Religious practice in Langkasuka seems to have been syncretic, blending Buddhism, Hinduism, and indigenous animist traditions. Chinese sources mention both Buddhist monasteries and Hindu temples. Archaeological excavations have uncovered religious structures that show Indian architectural influence, but with local modifications. Stone sculptures of Hindu deities like Vishnu and Shiva have been found, as have Buddhist votive tablets and small stupas. This religious pluralism was typical of early Southeast Asian port cities, where merchant communities from different cultural backgrounds needed to coexist peacefully. and where rulers found it advantageous to patronize multiple religious traditions rather than imposing a single orthodoxy. The writing system used in Langkasuka was based on Indian scripts, either Pallava or Grantha, which were adapted to write local languages. Several inscriptions have been found in southern Thailand that use these scripts, though their exact relationship to Langkasuka remains debated. Some are clearly Buddhist religious texts. Others appear to be commemorative inscriptions marking the construction of tanks or other public works. None provide the kind of detailed historical narrative we'd need to reconstruct Langkasuka's political history. No king lists, no descriptions of wars and conquests, no administrative details. Southeast Asian epigraphy from this period tends to focus on religious merit-making rather than historical chronicle, which is frustrating for modern historians, but tells us something about what these societies valued. Religious acts that generated karmic merit were considered more important to record than political events. The economic basis of Langkasuka's wealth, beyond the trans-peninsular trade, included tin mining, forest products, and possibly some agricultural surplus. The Malay Peninsula has rich tin deposits, and there's evidence of extensive tin mining and smelting from early periods. Chinese demand for tin was substantial, and controlling tin sources gave Langkasuka a valuable export commodity. The peninsula's forests produced fragrant woods, resins, and medicinal plants valued across Asia: camphor, eaglewood, benzoin. These aromatic substances commanded high prices and could be transported efficiently, given their low weight and high value. But here's where the mystery deepens. Despite this apparent wealth, despite centuries of existence, despite trade connections spanning from China to the Middle East, Langkasuka left no monuments remotely comparable to Angkor, Borobudur, or even the Cham Towers of central Vietnam. The largest structures found at proposed Langkasuka sites are modest brick temples and foundations. Nothing that would impress on a regional scale, let alone compete with the great temple complexes built elsewhere in Southeast Asia during the same period. Why? Several theories attempt to explain this absence of monumental architecture. One possibility is that Langkasuka's wealth was concentrated in the hands of a relatively small trading elite who invested their profits in portable goods, gold, jewelry, fine textiles, luxury imports rather than permanent structures. Merchants value mobility, and in an uncertain world where kingdoms rise and fall, investing heavily in immovable stone monuments might have seemed less attractive than accumulating wealth that could be moved if necessary. Another possibility is environmental. The Malay Peninsula's heavy rainfall and aggressive vegetation make construction and maintenance of large structures extremely difficult. Stone and brick buildings require constant upkeep to prevent being overwhelmed by jungle. A kingdom might have built substantial structures that have since been completely reclaimed by forest, their remains buried under meters of soil and vegetation. The famous case of Angkor, which was lost to the outside world for centuries despite being a massive stone city, demonstrates how quickly tropical jungle can conceal even enormous monuments. A third theory is that we're looking for the wrong kind of remains. Maritime trading kingdoms often built primarily in wood, which doesn't survive in tropical conditions. Palaces, warehouses, residential structures, even some temples might have been timber constructions that have left no trace except perhaps post holes or foundation stones. The absence of impressive ruins doesn't mean Langkasuka wasn't substantial. It might just mean it built in materials that didn't last. There's also the possibility that Langkasuka wasn't as centralized or as wealthy as the sources suggest. Chinese accounts of tributary kingdoms often inflated their importance because successful tribute missions reflected well on the Chinese. Emperor's virtue, the more distant, and impressive the kingdom sending tribute, the greater the emperor's cosmic authority appeared. Chinese records might have exaggerated Langkasuka's significance. Similarly, later Malay legends might have aggrandized historical kingdoms to create more impressive origin stories. Perhaps Langkasuka was never the major power that sources suggest, but rather a modest polity whose importance has been inflated by historical distance. But this skeptical interpretation has to contend with the fact that Chinese sources mention Langkasuka repeatedly over centuries, which suggests genuine sustained contact. The kingdom sent at least 15 recorded tributary embassies to China between the 6th and 14th centuries. That's not accidental or occasional contact. That's a sustained diplomatic relationship. Kingdoms don't maintain centuries of diplomatic engagement with China unless they have something substantial to offer and unless they're organized enough to mount expeditions across the South China Sea repeatedly. Langkasuka must have been a real kingdom with real resources and genuine political continuity. Even if we can't currently locate its capital or explain its archaeological invisibility, the fate of Langkasuka is as mysterious as its origins. The kingdom disappears from Chinese records after the 14th century. Later Malay chronicles mention Langkasuka's decline and transformation into other political entities, but the accounts are vague and contradictory. Some traditions claim that Langkasuka was conquered by Siam, the Thai kingdom to the north, which was expanding its control over the northern Malay Peninsula during this period. Others suggest that Langkasuka was absorbed into the Patani Sultanate, an Islamic kingdom that emerged in the 15th century and controlled much of the eastern Malay Peninsula.
Is that an ancient ruin?
The rise of Islam across maritime Southeast Asia in the 13th through 15th centuries fundamentally transformed the political landscape. Old Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms either converted to Islam and reconstituted themselves as sultanates, or were conquered by newly Islamized neighbors. Langkasuka, if it survived into this period, would have faced intense pressure to convert or be marginalized. The archaeological record shows that the old Hindu-Buddhist sites of the Malay Peninsula were gradually abandoned or transformed during this transition. New Islamic centers emerged, often at different locations, and the continuity with earlier kingdoms was broken. What complicates this narrative is that Islamic kingdoms of the Malay Peninsula preserved some traditions and legends about their pre-Islamic predecessors, but these stories are heavily mythologized, mixing historical memory with religious and ethnic origin myths that served the political needs of later sultanates. The Hikayat Merong Mahawangsa, a Malay literary work probably composed in the 18th century, but claiming to preserve much earlier traditions, tells the story of Langkasuka's founding and early history. According to the Hikayat, Langkasuka was founded by a prince from the Roman Empire who traveled to the Malay Peninsula and married a local princess, establishing a dynasty that ruled for generations. The story includes encounters with mythical creatures, divine interventions, and heroic adventures that are clearly legendary, but may preserve genuine historical kernels, possibly memories of contact with Western traders, or symbolic representations of cultural mixing between locals and foreign merchants. Disentangling history from legend in these sources is nearly impossible. But they tell us something important. The memory of Langkasuka persisted in Malay cultural consciousness, even after the kingdom itself vanished. People living on the Malay Peninsula remembered that there had been an ancient kingdom, that it had been prosperous and important, that it had connections to distant lands. This persistent memory across centuries is itself evidence that Langkasuka was real and significant. Completely unimportant kingdoms don't leave centuries-long traces in cultural memory. Modern scholarship on Langkasuka is advancing slowly, hampered by several factors. First, the areas where Langkasuka likely existed are now divided between Thailand and Malaysia, requiring international archaeological cooperation that can be complicated by political and academic rivalries. Second, many of the potential sites are in areas that are now heavily populated or agriculturally developed, making excavation difficult and expensive. Third, the deep south of Thailand has experienced political instability and insurgency in recent decades, making sustained archaeological work dangerous and logistically complex. Fourth, funding for Southeast Asian archaeology remains limited compared to more famous regions like Egypt or Mesopotamia, so excavations proceed slowly and many sites remain unexcavated. Despite these challenges, recent decades have seen real progress. Remote sensing technology, including satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, has helped identify buried structures without extensive excavation. Underwater archaeology in coastal areas has recovered shipwrecks and submerged ruins, providing new evidence about maritime trade networks. Systematic surveys of known sites have produced more detailed chronologies, helping establish when different areas were occupied and how settlement patterns changed over time. New inscriptions continue to be discovered, occasionally in remote locations where they've been preserved by chance. built into modern walls, buried in rice paddies, hidden in temple compounds.
As you can see,
Each discovery adds pieces to the puzzle, but the picture remains frustratingly incomplete. We know more about Langkasuka than we did 50 years ago, but fundamental questions remain unresolved. Where exactly was its capital? How did its political system function? What was its population? What languages did its people speak? How did it relate to neighboring kingdoms like Srivijaya, Dvaravati, and the Khmer Empire? What caused its ultimate disappearance? These aren't minor details. They're basic facts that we simply don't know. The mystery of Langkasuka forces us to confront the limitations of archaeological and historical reconstruction. Not every civilization leaves sufficient evidence for modern scholars to reconstruct confidently. Some kingdoms, for reasons of geography, building materials, climate, or historical accident, simply don't preserve well. This doesn't mean they weren't important in their own time. Langkasuka existed for centuries, participated in Asian trade networks, maintained diplomatic relations with multiple empires, and left lasting impressions in regional cultural memory. By any reasonable standard, it was a significant kingdom. But significance doesn't guarantee archaeological visibility. There's something almost poetic about a lost city that remains lost, despite decades of searching. In an age of satellite mapping and sophisticated archaeological techniques, when we can identify ancient sites from space and date artifacts to within decades, Langkasuka resists final discovery. Multiple sites claim to be the lost capital, each with plausible evidence, none with proof compelling enough to settle the debate. The kingdom remains elusive, glimpsed in fragments but never fully revealed. A civilization that occupied the historical record for centuries, but won't surrender its secrets to modern investigation. Perhaps this persistent mystery is Langkasuka's final gift to us, a reminder that history is not a solved puzzle but an ongoing investigation, that the past retains its capacity to surprise and frustrate us, that despite our technology and our methodologies, entire civilizations can slip through our fingers, leaving just enough trace to tantalize but never enough to satisfy. Every excavation season brings hope that this will be the year we finally find the definitive evidence, the undeniable proof that locates Langkasuka precisely and reveals its full story. But so far, the jungle keeps its secrets. The fishermen and rubber tappers of southern Thailand will continue stumbling upon ancient bricks and mysterious inscriptions. Archaeologists will continue excavating, mapping, analyzing. New theories will be proposed and debated. Slowly, incrementally, our understanding will deepen. But Langkasuka may never fully emerge from its obscurity. Some cities remain lost not because no one is looking, but because they don't want to be found. Because the jungle has reclaimed them too thoroughly. Because time has scattered their remains too widely. Because the civilization that built them was too maritime, too mobile, too comfortable leaving minimal footprints to satisfy our modern hunger for spectacular ruins and clear answers. The lost city of Langkasuka stands as a challenge to archaeologists and a rebuke to our assumptions about what constitutes historical importance. You don't need monumental architecture to be a significant civilization. You don't need to leave massive ruins to have shaped regional development, sometimes controlling a crucial trade route, facilitating exchanges between distant cultures, and persisting for centuries is enough to make history, even if it's not enough to guarantee remembrance. The mystery endures. The search continues, and somewhere in the jungles and rice paddies of the Malay Peninsula, beneath layers of soil and vegetation and time, the lost city waits, patient as stone, guarding its secrets until the day when perhaps finally, the evidence aligns and the centuries fall away, and Langkasuka emerges from shadow into light. Revealed at last, its long mystery solved. Until that day, we investigate, we theorize, we excavate, and we wonder at how completely a kingdom can vanish while leaving just enough trace to haunt our historical imagination, forever beckoning us forward, forever receding just beyond reach, the lost city that refuses to stay entirely lost but won't quite allow itself to be found.